Welcome to Poetry Society of Indiana's First Tuesdays membership meeting for July 2021. My name's Alys Caviness-Gober, and I'm presenting a brief look at two Japanese poetry forms, Haiku and Senryu. And I need to apologize in advance for two things. One, I have seasonal allergies, so I may be clearing my throat a lot. And two, I am very likely going to mispronounce an awful lot of Japanese words that I've only ever seen written down and never actually heard pronounced. So I apologize in advance for my mispronunciation of Japanese words and my occasional clearing of my throat. First up, I have for you a haiku that I wrote as I was preparing this presentation. Inside each raindrop, a swirling eternity. My clock chimes time's up. I wrote this poem as kind of a tongue-in-cheek reminder to myself to keep the presentation brief, because as I went down the rabbit hole of looking at different Japanese poetry forms, I was just, taken away by the history, the tradition, so many wonderful examples of poetry from different periods of time, right up into the present. And so I wrote this to kind of keep my mind on keeping the presentation brief. Like most haikus and most poetry in general, it could apply to many situations and experiences. And I love that about poetry, that we can connect to it no matter what the original author was actually thinking about when the poem was written. First up, I want to talk to you a little bit about elements of Japanese poetry that we're going to be referred to in this presentation. On, those are Japanese phonetic units. Kireji literally means cutting word, and kigo are natural or seasonal references in Japanese poetry. On, those phonetic units. On means sound in Japanese and includes the phonetic units counted in Japanese poetry like haiku, senryu, tanka, and other poetic forms. It's known as morai to English-speaking linguists, and on is basically obsolete in modern Japanese. Now the term for that linguistic concept is either haku or mora. So, are we using on or syllables? Well, English language discussions of Japanese poetry usually use the word syllable. Syllable is a little bit inaccurate though, but in Japanese language poetry, sometimes the original on count and the translated syllable count actually do match. The difference between syllables and on becomes clearer when you count the sounds in English language translations of Japanese poetic forms, and perhaps an easier way to look at it is in well-known Japanese place names and how they're pronounced. For example, excuse me, you have here 5 different Japanese cities: Nagasaki, Osaka, Tokyo, Nippon, and Nihon. The second column gives you the on count, the Japanese language sound unit count. The fifth syllable gives you, or the fifth column gives you the syllables in English. So it's very easy to see in this chart that the pronunciation differences exist in all of these except Nagasaki. Nagasaki has 4 on Japanese sound units and 4 English language syllables, but all the rest have a different number of on Japanese sound units. And so that makes it pretty clear that in Japanese traditional poetry, on is a very different thing than syllable. Now, Kireji, literally that cutting word, is the term for a special category of emphasis and or words used in certain types of Japanese traditional poetry. There's no exact equivalent of Kireji in English, and its function can be difficult to define. In English language haiku and other Japanese writing, as well as in translations of Japanese verses, Kireji may be represented by punctuation, typically by a dash or an ellipses or a tilde, and or as an exclamatory particle, such as how, or it's simply left unmarked. Kigo refers to natural or seasonal references in Japanese poetry, specifically haiku, and that ends the grammar lesson. Yay! Now on to haiku. Haiku is a type of short form poetry. Traditional haiku consists of 3 lines with 17 on and in a 5-7-5 phrase or line pattern, a Kireji, and a kigo. Note that haikai poems are now just called haiku, and short form poems that do not adhere to haiku specific rules are classified as senryu, which I'll talk about later. I have some examples of traditional haiku for you, and I've placed the poems on my own artwork as a nod to haikai art. The first one is by Kobayashi Isa, one of the greatest haiku poets ever. A world of dew, and within every dewdrop a world of struggle. By the way, in this poem, struggle is the Kireji. The next poem I have for you is by Katsushika Hokusai, A Poppy Blooms. I write, erase, rewrite, erase again, and then a poppy blooms. Now sometimes Kireji is really subtle, and I think this poem is a good example of that. It's hard to tell. Is the comma after the word again? Is that the Kireji? Is the Kireji the word then? Or is the Kireji the word blooms? I think you can pick whatever you want as the Kireji in that example. The same is true of our next example by Natsume Soseki, Over the Wintry Forest. Winds howl in rage with no leaves to blow. Is the Kireji the comma, the word howl, the word rage? You decide. My final traditional Japanese haiku example for you is by Carl Sadakichi Hartman. Sadakichi was born in 1860 in Japan, and he immigrated to America in 1882. He became an American citizen in 1894, and he lived in California in his later years, where he died in 1944. Sadakichi wrote some of the earliest English language haiku. His influence on English language Japanese poetry as it became popular in the West cannot be understated. I encourage you to find out more about Sadakichi Hartman and his poetry. Go down that rabbit hole. It's fascinating. The poem is beautiful. It's titled Haikai 3. Butterflies a wing. Are you flowers returning to your branch in spring? I think that's really great. So, as Japanese poetry traveled west, excuse me, many Western authors started to break with traditional limitations regarding form. These poems are usually referred to as either modern style or freestyle poems. In particular, Western authors broke with the 5-7-5 rule for haiku, but maintained haiku power, simplicity, and brevity. Influential American writers like Jack Kerouac and Ezra Pound and many more wrote in a freestyle form of haiku. Ezra Pound was deeply influenced by Sadakichi Hartman. In fact, many people believe that Pound's work borrowed, quote unquote, heavily from Hartman's. Pound's haiku in a station of the metro is often given as an example of one of the earliest English language freestyle haikus. And even though I am not a fan of Ezra Pound, I can't stand him as a human being, I wanted to share that poem with you because it is so well known. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Okay, let's take a short break. What I want you to do is have paper and pen handy, or pencil, whatever. We're going to move and write. So first you're going to get up out of your chair. You can stay in the room you're in. You can go in a different room, swing your arms around, do some jumping jacks, something to get the blood flowing. Once you're done with that, let your eye fall upon a nearby object. Jot down its colors, shape, function, size, how it makes you feel. Use words, any words you want, anything except what it is called. So we're writing down words that are not the name of the object, right? Then I want you to write a freestyle haiku inspired by your notes, your words that you wrote down. Now, your haiku can be about the object if you want, but it doesn't have to be. It can be about anything. It can be about something in nature. It can be about an experience that you've had. It can be about a loved one. Your poem can be about anything, but I want you to use some of those words that you jotted down. You don't have to use all of them. You know, it's a haiku, and it's going to be freestyle. So don't worry about syllable count or lines. Just try to get that brevity of thought in there with the words that you wrote down. And then save your haiku for our round robin later this evening. Now, for those of you just watching the video, you can just press pause and do the exercise. But we're going to move on in the video to the next part of the presentation, because obviously we're not going to share round robin new poems publicly, because we want to save those for submitting to contests, right? Okay, so moving right along. Similar to haiku, short form poems that don't adhere to haiku's specific rules are classified as senryu. Now, Senryu literally means river willow. Isn't that beautiful? It really is. Senryu is named after Edo period Haikai poet Kireji Senryu, who lived from 1718 to 1790. His collection, Haifuyanagidaru, pretty sure I didn't pronounce that correctly, launched the genre of Senryu into public consciousness. Senryu elements typically are 3 lines with 17 on, or syllables, can be written in 2 lines and can be written with fewer syllables, but never more. For example, line 1 is traditionally 5 on, or syllables, and describes an image. Line 2 has 7 on, or syllables, and adds conflicting image or expands the first image. And line 3 has 5 on, or syllables, and provides insight. This is the Kireji, or aha moment, if you will, through a juxtaposed image. Yeah. Natural human experience is often what senryu tend to be about. It's written in simple, humorous, sometimes cynical or darkly humorous, bawdy, vulgar language. Now, modern senryu covers all aspects of the human condition, and I encourage you to look into the poetry of modern senryu poets. Senryu is usually presented with an energy or liveliness in the focus and choice of words. It's often written in the moment. It's an imagist poem, if you will. It draws humor or some cynical aspect from the image. It's usually untitled, but can be numbered. So, unlike haiku, senryu don't usually include a Kireji cutting word or a kigo seasonal word, unless in line 3, like we said, in line 3, you can have that insight, that aha moment. That can be a Kireji. An example from the collection I mentioned by Senryu himself is this very short senryu. Hide and seek, count to 3, winter comes. Isn't that great? I mean, I challenge, writing senryu is actually very challenging, and it's hard to beat the masters. Okay, so gut instinct poll. Which style best meets your modern poet's soul? We're going to have a raising of hands for number 1, traditional haiku, number 2, freestyle haiku, or number 3, senryu. So, all in favor of number 1, traditional haiku, raise your hands. Yay! All in favor of number 2, freestyle haiku, raise your hands. Yay! And all in favor of senryu, number 3, raise your hands. Yay! Okay, so for the video people watching, you're not going to get the results of our opinion poll in the meeting. Suffice to say, I personally cannot pick one over any of the others. I love them all, and depending on mood or what I want to write about, either 1, 2, 3, traditional haiku, freestyle haiku, or senryu sometimes fit my purpose. So it's really hard to choose a favorite. All right, so I have some concluding ideas for you. This isn't exactly homework, these are just suggestions. You can experiment with haiku in both traditional and freestyle forms, get familiar with them. You can start a haibun, a diary or travel journey. Haibun is haiku mixed with prose, and that's really fun. It's a little more challenging than you might think, but it's really fun to work with. You can experiment with English language senryu form. That would be 3 lines with 17 syllables. You can experiment with senryu in traditional Japanese form, 3-line with 17 on, the sound units. A little more challenging for us native English speakers. And once you have your haiku and your senryu poems all written, you can enter them into PSI's annual poetry contest. Category 15 calls specifically for haiku and senryu poems. And you can also submit other haiku and senryu poems to a lot of the other categories that have any form as their form requirement. PSI's annual poetry contest, we host it every year. This year there are 23 categories. Again, category 15 is specifically for senryu and haiku. Many of the other categories have specific topics or themes, but the form is open to any form. So you could write haiku and senryu for those categories as well. The top 3 placings in each category are published in PSI's annual inked paper anthology at the end of each year. The contest submission fee covers entry into all 23 categories. Isn't that great? You don't have to enter all 23 contests, but we do have a submission fee that covers all of them. And for PSI members, the fee is $10, and for non-members, it's $15. So be sure and share to all your non-member friends and tell them to become PSI members. You can get more information about membership and the annual contest at poetrysocietyofIndiana.org, and that's where you'll find all the downloadable forms and guidelines and everything for the contest. And then I know you're going to want more information on Japanese poetry, right? And I hope to be presenting more on other forms of Japanese poetry at our fall rendezvous this year. It's a 3-day event. This year it falls on Halloween weekend, October 29th through October 31st. So, of course, PSI is encouraging the wearing of costumes and getting in the Halloween spirit. Stay tuned for more info about this year's fall rendezvous coming to you soon on the PSI website, poetrysocietyofIndiana.org. Most of you know it's open to the public. So members, you'll be getting information in email. Non-members can find information on the website. And as you know, there's a different fee charged, registration fee charged for members versus non-members. So thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to seeing all of you in costume at PSI's Fall Rendezvous. Bye.